Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we are talking about groups versus teams and really thinking about how can we turn any group into a team. If you have any experience on teams or working in groups, you know that there are some differences, and we're just going to really highlight what those are and start thinking about how we can encourage those differences, specifically the positive differences, and how we can be the best member of either a group or a team that we can be. So we'll start off by defining what teams are, thinking about what some of the differences are between a group and a team. We'll talk about some team member behaviors, both good and bad, so some things that you can highlight, but also some things that you can avoid if you are finding yourself in a situation where those things apply. We'll talk about how to build teamwork, and there are just a handful of things that we'll talk about there, and then we'll talk about team empowerment, and finally we will review. Should be a pretty short video today, but to start out, I would like for you to just take a few minutes, pause the video, and think about what are some of the key factors that differentiate a team from a group. What are some of the differences from your experience? And obviously, if you're watching this recording, we won't discuss, but I do encourage you to write them down and think about them and maybe talk about them with somebody that you know. It can be an interesting conversation starter because you'd be surprised at the perspectives, the opinions, the feelings that people have towards groups and towards teamwork. So just take a few minutes here, write down some of the key elements of a group versus a team, and then restart the video and we'll talk about it. So from my perspective, and also from an academic perspective, one of the key differences between a group and a team is that teams have a higher degree of collaboration than groups. So a team, oftentimes, right, it's a group of people that are brought together specifically to accomplish a task, to do a thing, to perform some kind of activity. And those people know that they are going to work together to accomplish that and know that they can't do it alone. No sports team, right? No team sport could function without an entire team. So there's a higher degree of collaboration, which directly connects us to this idea of having a complementary skill set. You really can't have people doing everything. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I worked at Starbucks, and I circle back to this experience regularly because it was a rich experience. I won't say good or bad, but I learned a lot, and I was able to highlight a lot of things. And one of those things I was able to highlight was this perspective that I find is quite common in a lot of fast food, customer service type situations, and that's that they want everybody to be able to do everything. And our skills, our personalities, our ideals are not always going to align, right? Our characteristics are not always going to align with what is necessary for any individual position. So we have to be thinking about how can we put together a team with complementary skill sets. So just again, as an example, when I was working at Starbucks, I was not very good at making drinks. I didn't have any desire to make drinks. There were some circumstances where I was purposefully resisting making drinks because I didn't want to do that. I didn't feel that met my skill set. I was better at the face-to-face interactions, whether it was through the drive-through window or on the register. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be interacting with people, talking to people, creating those conversations and that experience that Starbucks loves to sell. And I had a shift supervisor who was really opposed to that. And even though we had some people on the shift who were amazing drink people, they made drinks very quickly, they were very efficient, they liked doing it, that's what they wanted to be doing. That shift supervisor put me on bar making drinks and put one of those other people on the register. Neither one of us wanted to be in that position, but they were putting us in a position where our skill sets were not complementary. And it didn't go very well, and ultimately the shift supervisor was upset with me, and I had a conversation with my shift supervisor about how teams work, right? If you've ever been on a team, you don't expect everybody on that team to do every single thing and do it really well. have your position, you have your role, and that's your role, that's your position, and it fits your skill set. So we had an interesting conversation about that, and as you can imagine, it was an interesting conversation. So we'll leave it at that. So when we're thinking about differences, we have to think about having those complementary skill sets, and that's going to elevate us from having a group to having a team. The next thing is developing more group identity, cohesion, and conformity. Teams have a very strong social element. There's a lot of connection. There's a lot of emotion. Those relationships are really important. So that's one of the key differences between a group and a team. Naturally, developing those relationships, developing those team bonds, it takes time. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes commitment, it takes motivation. You can't just put a group of people together and have them do a team building activity and call them a team. That's not how it works at all. You have to nurture and develop those relationships so that you can have that conformity, that cohesion, that team identity. So when we're thinking about defining what a team is, so not just thinking about the differences between groups and teams, but when we really think about what a team is, we have to think about it in a very systematic and purposeful way. So I like this definition, and it is that a team is a constellation of members with complementary skills who act as an interdependent unit, are equally committed to a common mission, subscribe to a cooperative approach to accomplish that mission, and hold themselves accountable for team performance. Well, that's a rather large definition. It's a little bit dense. So just starting at the top, right, we have complementary skills. We already identified that. But some of the other key components are that there's interdependence. What I do impacts somebody else. What they do impacts me. What I do impacts the team. We are interconnected. There's a connectedness within our team, and that is a key factor. We are interdependent of each other. We are equally committed. We have to have that commitment. We have to have that motivation in order to move from being a group to being a team. We have to want to be there. We have to be motivated to win, to learn, to grow, to accomplish that task, and we have to be committed to doing that. We have to be willing to work together. So cooperation is a key element here. We have a cooperative approach. I understand that I can't accomplish this task without somebody else, so I'm going to have to work with them. Whether I like them or dislike them, get along with them, don't get along with them. When that team comes together, we have to cooperate. That doesn't mean we have to hang out outside of that, but when you show up and you're doing team activities, it's very important that you are thinking about your behaviors, your communication skills, so that you can effectively cooperate without negatively impacting the team. And the last thing here is accountability. We have to be able to say, you know, you're accountable for this. This is your responsibility, and you have to take that seriously if you want to be a member of a team. So accountability, of course, is very important. So when we're thinking about some of those behaviors that positively or negatively impact a team, that allow us to develop that cooperation, that cohesion, that group identity, that comes down oftentimes to the behaviors of the team members. And personally, I've been both a good team member and a bad team member in a variety of different settings. And looking at this, it makes sense, right? And oftentimes we know when we're being a bad team member. But we're going to highlight just a few behaviors that we want to avoid first, and then we'll talk about some good team member behaviors. So the first one is being self-centered, having a me orientation. You'll hear, somebody say there's no I in team, but somebody will follow that up with there is me, there's a me, and you can think about that however you want. The idea though is that to be a part of a team, you have to be willing to put that team before yourself, before your own successes. And if you're not willing to do that, you are not engaging in teamwork, you're not engaging in that activity, you are damaging the function of your group. So we don't want to be focused on ourselves. We also don't want to be too cynical, right? We have to go into a situation thinking that we're going to have some kind of positive result. So whether you like them or not, professional athletics, this is an interesting point. Every professional athlete, every professional team goes into that season expecting to be in the championship game. That is what they want to do. And they're not cynical about, somebody's going to get hurt or this is what happened last year. They're focused, right? You can look at head coaches. Coaches are always, this is what we're going to do and we're going to make it happen. And they're positive about it. They push forward, and that hopefully ripples through the team to avoid cynicism, because if you think that something's going to go poorly, oftentimes it does. You may also have a negativity bias, which we talked about briefly before, and you want to avoid that. You want to create a positive history of cooperation so that you're not engaging in that negativity bias, because negativity biases and our personal feelings, perceptions, attitudes directly impact our communication skills, our communication habits. So some things we want to avoid as far as communication aspect. We want to avoid negative commentary, which goes hand in hand with cynicism. We want to avoid insulting or degrading our colleagues, our teammates. We don't want to be attacking anybody. This, again, goes back to this idea that we have to hold people accountable, but not degrade people, not belittle people, not make them feel like they're less than, because that negatively impacts the group. And this is a really important factor, is that there's a balance between holding somebody accountable, understanding that somebody might make a mistake, somebody might do something wrong, somebody might not know something and therefore make a different decision than you would have made, and that's okay, right? It's about learning as a group, growing as a group, and improving as a group. And sometimes that means that you're going to have people who are better and people who are not as good at something, and so we have to figure out how can we lift that person up. And this is one of the things that I think is really important about team membership, is that ability to elevate the other people on your team. And it's something we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, we need to highlight some of the good things that we can do, some things that will make us good teammates. So the first one here is having a group orientation. And again, that's just simply focusing on that team, right? You might be having a really bad day. You might not be achieving what you wanted to that day. You might be having a bad week, a bad month, a bad year, a bad season. It just might be rough, right? Because that's how life works. But if the group is doing well, that's the goal, right? That's the important part of a team, is making sure that the group, team, or organization is doing well. You have to be adaptable. This comes back to our roles. If you haven't watched that yet, you should, because it really directly highlights role fixation, new member roles, and adjusting our roles. It's very important that we are being dynamic. Personally, one of my goals anytime I enter a new group or a new team is I want to be that person who can fill a variety of different roles, and I'm willing to. If the group needs somebody to do this thing, I'll do that. I like to learn new things. I like to see things from different perspectives, and so for me, that's something that I like to do, is I will offer to do different things. So just for example, when I worked at a restaurant, and at that restaurant, there were lots of opportunities to do different things. And just by simply saying, hey, I'll do that if, nobody else wants to, I ended up hosting, bussing, serving, being a bartender. I have a history of dishwashing, being a prep cook, doing delivery. I've even been a corporate brand ambassador, which essentially meant I went around and passed out menus. I was willing to fill all those different roles, and for me it was a good thing because I got to do different things. I got to experience it in different ways, but at the same time I was helping out my team and my organization and my store by doing that, because I was filling those different roles. So for me, adaptability is really important. It's something that I focus on a lot. And the last one here is to focus on positive communication. So we've talked a lot about communication. If you're in my course or one of my courses, we've talked a lot about communication, what it is, how we go about it, what are some things to be thinking about. But if you haven't taken this course, just take a second and think about what are some important aspects to positive communication, and think about yourself. What are some of the things that you respond well to? Do you respond well to being attacked? Probably not. Do you respond well to being respected and having a conversation with somebody? Probably. So you have to think about some of those things, because those things directly link to our ability to develop teamwork. So we'll go through a few steps here. These are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can apply these in any group, in any team situation. But we'll start with the 4 C's. And the first one is to develop clear goals. And this means you have to interact with everybody in that group or in that team to develop those goals. In my classes, especially in group discussion, I have my students, when they do group projects, develop 3 to 5 goals that are very specific. Is that goal everybody's going to attend a class? Yes, no, maybe. Is the goal to get an A, to get a B, to get a C, to overcome this challenge, to do something creative? What is the goal? And in order to do that, you have to have a conversation with everybody on that team, because having those conversations, even if you don't necessarily do what one person says, just by asking them what their insights are, what they think, that has been shown to increase satisfaction in the group, which is inevitably going to improve how our group, how our team functions. So we have to have clear goals, and those goals have to be cooperative. They can't be goals where we can simply do it by ourselves, right? If we want to encourage interdependence, we have to create a situation where we have to work together. We have to have that cooperative element so that we can achieve something that an individual couldn't do. And that's really the amazing thing about groups, is that a group can do something that an individual couldn't achieve. So group work is not a bad thing. It's just a matter of how we go about doing it. And in creating those cooperative goals and creating those clear goals, we also have to create challenging goals. It has to take some work. It has to take some effort. It has to take commitment and motivation. So you have to think about, what are our goals and are they challenging? Is it challenging enough to just ask people to show up to class? Yes, no, maybe. Is it challenging enough to ask somebody to attend a meeting? It depends. So you have to be thinking about your group, your team. You might say, no, absolutely not, because we can Zoom in, we can do all these other things, but you might have, say, organizational requirements that require that you attend a meeting in person. And that might be a challenging goal, because you might have something else going on in your life. You might be traveling. You might live, say, if you work from home, you might live on the other side of the country from where your organization is at. And that's a challenging goal. How do you attend those meetings? How do you create teamwork through a distance? And that's where a lot of this comes into play. And the last thing, again, is commitment. Everybody on the team has to be committed to achieving those goals. And one way we can create commitment is by simply including people, talking to them about the goals, creating cooperative and challenging goals. So the 4 C's are really simple, and I highly recommend that you use them in your group and team work. The second thing here is to develop a team identity. So you create really amazing goals. They're challenging, they're cooperative, everybody's committed. But one of the things that elevates a group to a team is that group identity. And sometimes we want to create a narrative. This, of course, can be seen through all sorts of television and film and media, but it can also be seen in our day-to-day lives, right? When you think about, say, a group who is, the high achieving group, and they want to do everything well, and that's how they identify, that's how they connect, then all of a sudden you have a team narrative, and that can be what guides your team. That will also lead to hopefully developing some kind of solidarity symbols. So this can be a team name, a symbol, a slogan, or a logo, depending on what you're doing. I always have my students in my classes for group work develop a team name, and it gets them talking to each other, and they oftentimes come up with really creative names that require some kind of voting or discussion, and it helps develop that team identity. You can also create a team language, so use jargon, have nicknames, handshakes, certain symbols that you use to create that relationship, to create that connection with the other people on your team. So developing team identity, pretty simple, and honestly it could be kind of fun depending on how you go about it, but I really encourage you to identify and connect with your team as a team, develop a little team narrative, think about how you can create solidarity symbols, and then also, of course, have that language, have that jargon, that symbolism that will tie everybody together. The third step here is to designate roles. And again, if you haven't watched the lecture on roles, you should, but avoiding role ambiguity is really important, because when we don't know what our role is, we end up seeing that there's tension, there's confusion, there's disturbance, there's system disturbance. So we have to be clear about what our roles are. This means that you assign group roles early in the team development process. You have to have a conversation where you say, what are our skills, what are our characteristics, what are our wants, what are our values, how can we go about creating a team out of this group? And part of that is thinking about having those complementary skill sets. So say, for example, in one of my classes, a group comes together and somebody's like, I really want to have a leadership role. I want to practice delegating. I want to practice communication. I really want to have this leadership role. Somebody else on that team says, you know what, that sounds great because I don't want anything to do with leadership. I am a graphic design major and I want to be involved in the design elements of our visuals and all of that, the design factors that relate to our group, developing a logo, a team name, all of that stuff. Somebody else says, okay, awesome. That sounds really good. I'm actually a business management major, and what I would like to do is just facilitate everything. I want to coordinate meetings. I want to be in charge of making sure that everybody knows when and where and what we're doing. I want to coordinate our organization, our group. And the final person says, all of that sounds amazing. I don't want anything to do with any of that. I want to do the research. So tell me what we're interested in. We'll come up with it. You coordinate, you facilitate conversations, you facilitate our meetings. You do the design stuff. You are the leader. You take on that leadership role. All I want to do is research. I want to read. I want to learn. I will think about and distribute research and share that information. That works really well. So you have to be thinking about complementary skill sets, our desires, what we want, as well as acknowledging those social and task functions. So take a second here, because I have been talking for a little bit of a long time. Take a second, pause, and just think about what are some of the roles you like. Now, you could simply Google, different roles, and you can get the terminology for them. There are so many different roles. Or just take a second and think about what are some of the things that you like to do, some of the things you don't like to do, and this will give you a better opportunity to think about what role you want to play in any group or in any team. So pause the video now, take a few minutes, think about it, and then when you come back, move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've thought about our roles, we've thought about what we want to do, what we like to do, what we're good at. Now we have to think about empowering our team. Now, empowerment is very much a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot like synergy, and we want to be thinking about what that means. So team empowerment is the process of enhancing the capabilities and influence of individuals and groups. So it's the process of enhancing the capabilities and influence of individuals and groups. So we're talking about making people better. There are a variety of ways we can go about this. We'll talk about 4 of them. But really quickly, one of the things I want to highlight here is that this is where we get into this idea where we are elevating people's skill sets. We are helping people become the best versions of themselves within that situation. And one of the things that I've always found really interesting, I'm not really a big sports fan per se. I'm not a diehard fan of any one team, but I follow. I think it's interesting, and a lot of the times I think it's interesting because I like the group dynamics. That's a little bit nerdy of me, I guess, but one of the things I always found really interesting was this debate around whether or not Tom Brady is or was the best quarterback of all time. And one of the things that I noticed that doesn't get brought up very often was Tom Brady's ability to elevate players on the team, to make them, not necessarily make them, but to empower them, to help them become the best versions of themselves. And I say this simply because time and time and time again, you could see a player go play with Tom Brady and become one of the elite players in the NFL. And then that person would leave, go to another team, and they're not quite as successful. To me, that is the definition of empowerment. When somebody comes to work with you, when you go to work with somebody else, and they help you just take that next step to being just a little bit better, to being the best version of yourself, that is empowerment. So we want to be thinking about how we can do that, because that's how our teams become really successful. If everybody on the team helps each other grow, helps each other improve, we are able to achieve really amazing things. So looking at the 4 dimensions of empowerment, we start with autonomy. So this is the degree to which team members experience freedom, independence, and discretion in their work. So if we want to build empowerment, we have to trust each other. We have to have some autonomy. We can't micromanage everything. If you assign me a task, you hopefully trust me enough to complete that task adequately. And if I don't, let me know how I can improve that, right? That's how we empower. That's how we grow. That's how we improve. We don't just say, you do this, and then we look over their shoulder the entire time or just do it ourselves. Number 2 is impact. So we have to increase the impact that somebody has by having them understand the degree of significance given by outsiders to the work being produced by the team. So if you have a high impact on your team, everybody acknowledges that our work is going to directly impact the lives, the world around us, it's a good thing, right? We'll take that more seriously, hopefully. Not always, but we want to be thinking about it that way. Then we have potency. So potency is our shared belief among team members that they have and can be effective as a team. So when we have potency, we think we are a good team. Good luck beating us. We're the best, right? We are going to really do a good job on any given day, and we might not win. We might not produce the best product. We might not complete the task as effectively as we should, but goodness, we're going to really try, and we're going to improve as we move through, and good luck beating us in the long run. And the last one is meaningfulness. So this is our team's perception that its tasks are important, valuable, and worthwhile. This is really important. If you don't feel like what you're doing on your team matters, if you're not feeling like your team matters, it's going to be really hard to have that commitment, that cooperation, and to really elevate our group. So the last thing that we're going to talk about here, we talked about some of the key elements of developing empowerment, but now we have to think about some of the threats to empowerment. Now, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think that most of you will connect with these, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through them and just list them out. I'll explain a little bit, but for the most part, I think these are going to make sense. So threats to empowerment, right? This is really important. We have to, first of all, acknowledge that a group, a team, an organization has to embrace empowerment at all levels. Otherwise, you're going to have dissent. If I'm working in one really effective team and somebody's not in that team, they're saying a different department, seeing what we're doing, they're going to get frustrated that they're not doing that, right? That frustration is going to create dissent. It's going to create dissatisfaction. It is going to negatively impact our team. That's going to lead to group member resistance. If I see a group, a team doing something really effectively, and I want to do that, right? I see a team doing really well, my team is not, and I want to elevate my team. I want to say, hey, we should be doing this because look at how they're doing it. And the leader, my team says, no, that's not for us. That's going to create dissatisfaction. It's going to create some system disturbance. It's going to create resistance. So we have to think about how we can empower without making really radical changes, and also how we can avoid that member resistance. That's both a personal thing as well as a group thing. You have to be thinking about how you're going to do it. If you have a team or a group that is not accustomed to having that autonomy, it's going to be really difficult for them to adjust to that. So you have to develop that history of positive cooperation. You have to develop a positive history of autonomy. So it's a little bit at a time, especially when you're trying to completely change the dynamics of a group or a team. It's not going to be an overnight thing. And so you're going to have to think about how can you work around that resistance that's going to be caused by the disturbance. Number 3 is that we have to think about considering and taking into consideration team member contributions as the primary element. This happens a lot. When individuals are they feel like they don't matter because their contributions are not taken seriously, or B, there's too much emphasis on individual accomplishments, you have dissatisfaction from both aspects. So you have to have a balance. So you have to acknowledge that somebody's role, somebody's job, it matters to the group, it matters to the team. But your focus can't be on individual achievement because you're trying to develop cooperation. So if I am on a team and somebody else is constantly getting praise, well, in my experience, the group or the team starts to think, well, they're just being favored, right? It's not fair. Coach, boss, professor, teacher likes that person more. And so what we have to do if we're in a leadership position to encourage empowerment is highlight individual successes so that people feel valuable, but at the same time nurture that cooperation and elevate everybody, not just focus on one person. And sometimes what happens is we say, well, this one person is really great. Sure, that one person might be really great, but can they be that great without the support of the rest of the team? Absolutely not, right? So it takes a team, it takes a group for that person to elevate. And so it's important that we highlight those team and individual achievements and have a balance. We ought to be thinking about rewards and praise for individual accomplishments. Again, kind of what we just talked about. If we highlight too much about individual accomplishments, we take away from that cooperative nature. We negatively impact the system. So we have system disturbance, we have conflict, we have issues within our team, and ultimately we probably are going to have less success and less empowerment. So when we're thinking about groups versus team, we've covered quite a few different concepts, but I'm hoping that they make sense, right, in your personal experiences. So we defined what teams are. We talked about the good and bad behaviors that we can emulate to improve our team function. We talked about how to build teamwork. We had those 3 different steps. And then we talked about team empowerment. Now this gets us to the end of our lecture today. I really hope that you learned something and that you are able to elevate your groups into teams and have more successful group and team interactions moving forward. Take care, everybody.